So there was a landmark SCOTUS ruling, that being the Supreme Court ruling on the rights of LGBTQ workers, which is really awesome because in this case, they basically decided that sexuality and gender identity fall under I believe it's Article 7 of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And so they're saying that, yes, this is a legal protection, which is really dope. And so this guy Franklin Graham, who I guess he's an evangelical leader, he sounded off on this ruling. Um, he says, "quote It erodes religious freedoms across this country." So, one thing that I really enjoy about this, other than the ruling being actually good, by the way, it was 6-3, and I want to say that Neil Gorsuch actually ruled in favor of saying that yes, this actually falls under the purview of Article 7 of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So that this ruling makes it illegal for an employer to fire someone for being trans or for being gay or any of that kind of stuff. Which, anytime you're talking about these arbitrary characteristics, skin color, and yes, religion as well, and things of that nature, um, you can't have these kinds of things allowed where you can just be fired for being black or for being gay or whatever it may be. And so, yeah, Neil Gorsuch actually sided with the liberals on this one. So it was a 6-3 ruling on this one. He says in Title VII, Congress adopted broad language making it illegal for an employer to rely on an employee's sex when deciding to fire that employee. We do not hesitate to recognize today a necessary consequence of that legislative choice. An employer who fires an individual merely for being gay or transgender defies the law. So his ruling is also kind of interesting, honestly, because it doesn't really seem to. Uh, his ruling does, and he says also how these doctrines protecting religious liberty interact with Title VII are questions for future cases. Honestly, this case doesn't really seem like that much of even a SCOTUS case, at least from his opinion. His opinion seems more to be about just what the law is, not about the constitutionality of said law, which is interesting. Um, but one thing that I also enjoy about this is that now we're getting to the harsher extents of the whole, religious freedom arguments. Because it's one thing to basically be saying that, oh, I shouldn't have to bake a gay cake, whatever that means. Obviously, a cake for a gay couple's wedding. It's one thing, which I think is also bogus. But it's a whole nother thing to be able to fire somebody based on their sexual orientation, or their gender identity, etc., etc. So, I like that the religious freedom argument is starting to teeter in that territory because you starts to get. I think that as the more absurd that it gets, right? I think that the more it gets exposed. And so this same thing was used, to keep black people enslaved. The Bible was used to keep black people enslaved. And religion has been used in all sorts of ways, and it can be used in all sorts of ways. And so, what this whole religious freedom argument comes down to, in these terms, to me, come into really how far do you go? How absurd are you willing to go? And so I guess there are just lines that are drawn. In the Bible, there's a verse about how women can't be teachers. So, what if you're a private business that refuses to associate with women teachers, right? That would be pretty odd. And I think most people would be like, what the fuck? That's really weird. And so people just draw these arbitrary lines when it comes to this kind of religious freedom arguments. So I think if you're a private business that's open to the public, if you have somebody who's coming in, let's say you're like Jewish or something, and they're saying, hey, we want you to bake a cake that has like swastikas on it, that's totally fine to be like, fuck no, I'm not doing that. That's totally fine, understandable. But if a gay person comes in and is like, hey, we want a wedding cake for a wedding custom made, you're not like in any way endorsing that or anything like that. You're just making a cake and you're doing it for everyone else. At a certain point, that line of segregation has to be dropped. The same way it was for black people and how black people weren't allowed to eat in restaurants. So I think that there's a fine line between something that's clearly insulting and probably trollish and just generally really disgusting, and something that's just, typical and falls within the same purview of what you would do for someone else. If you're making cakes for straight weddings, but you're not doing it for gay ones, sorry, but you shouldn't be allowed to be open in business the same way that you shouldn't be able to have a business that says no blacks allowed, or no blacks at the front in the stools, or whatever. Like, we have to, like, seriously, you can't have these kind of weird segregated shit, and your religion is fundamentally moronic and stupid as hell. um, and so you shouldn't be allowed to segregate and discriminate based on your moronic beliefs of this kind of I don't know, sky daddy or whatever the hell it is you think that this is. So awesome SCOTUS ruling, really good to see. And the the waves that this whole religious freedom argument is going to have to wade now is going to be very interesting to see.